welcome to our special year-end edition of Perspectives. I'm Lian Peck. What a year it's been. In virtual succession, we've witnessed change after change of leadership. Most recently, in South Korea, the first female president. In Japan, Shinzo Abe and the Liberal Democratic Party are back. In China, a new set of slightly obscure leaders shooed in its once-in-a-decade transition. In the US, Barack Obama is poised to move triumphantly into term 2. And of course, out of nowhere, a rocket is fired, care of belligerent North Korea, to end the year on a bang. Pardon the pun. So where do we go from here, seeing as that old Mayan prophecy about the end of the world has come and gone, and we're still sitting here? What will 2013 bring? Joining us today to do some geopolitical tea leaf reading are Kavi Chong-Kitavon, Senior Fellow at the Institute of Security and International Studies from the Chulalongkorn University, Li Mingjiang, Associate Professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Anne Florini, Professor of Public Policy at the School of Social Sciences, Singapore Management University, and Sudhir Vadaketh, Senior Editor at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Welcome, all of you. Now, first off, we know there's been a lot of rhetoric all of 2012 about the U.S. pivot to Asia. I guess the question is whether this is going to add up, this pivot. Is it going to add up strategically? Is it going to be a repackaging of all policies? Can the U.S., given all its problems at home, afford to re-engage deeper with Asia? And let's start with you.
I think there's no question but that the U.S. is serious about engaging deeply with Asia. The term pivot, well, even the Obama administration doesn't want to use the term anymore because it makes it sound like there's a fundamental change going on. And it isn't really a fundamental change. It's more a signal to America's friends and allies in the regions that, yes, the U.S. is back. It's seriously engaged. It will not be as distracted by the various wars and other issues that it has been having to address. And that to the degree that there are power shifts going on within Asia, the U.S. cannot be counted out. Mm-hmm. The fairly minor steps that have been taken so far, things like the deployment of a small number of troops to Darwin in Australia, isn't really, that's more of a signal. It's not really a fundamental change.
Okay. Do you think then that there's been a change in this so-called rebalancing from a more sort of military sort of approach to one where the economics of the rebalancing is taking prominence? As you said, you know, there's some shifting in some of the military, but really, if you look at even the president's visit to Myanmar of late, it was really as much about trade as it was about weaning the country off the influence of China, would you say, Sudhir?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a definite recognition that, you know, over the next decade or even past that, most of the global economic growth is going to be powered by Asia and much of the emerging world. And so we're in the middle of this huge shift from, you know, the old Western democracies towards some of your newer emerging countries, particularly China, India, but also places like Indonesia and the Philippines, which have been growing quite well. And so, you know, the U.S. definitely has to be more involved in the region. As you say, because, you know, its own economic growth prospects are going to be inextricably tied to what happens in Asia.
Mm-hmm. But what about the recent violence in Gaza and, of course, what's going on in Syria? Do you think then that the U.S. can afford to be sort of rebalancing towards the region here, Kavi? What do you think?
Well, yes, I mean, Southeast Asia is very important to America's economic health, not to mention security. And I think Syria will be the main topic of discussion and policy. But Southeast Asia will continue to dominate the policymakers because you have rising China and also allies that are in trouble, both South Korea and Japan. So America have to pay attention. And after all, America is poorer, and they need burden sharing from Japan and South Korea.
Sure. So I guess this brings us really to the big question of, you know, what shape U.S.-China relations are going to take in 2013. What do you think, Mingjiang?
I think in 2013, we're going to see intensified competition rivalry between U.S. and China. The last couple of years, since 2010, we've seen this growth of Sino-U.S. strategic rivalry. And very likely in 2013, this trend will continue. And I think it's a new era of frequent frictions in East Asia because at the structural level, you're seeing growing confrontations and contradictions between U.S. and China. For U.S., It wants to maintain its predominant strategic position in East Asia, whereas China sees American efforts as a damage to its own strategic and regional influence.
Mm-hmm. I guess, there was a lot of talk during the elections, of course, by Obama, the fact that, he was talking very tough on China, and a lot of people at that point were saying, well, that's just electioneering, that's just rhetoric. I mean, is it really? I mean, are we going to see something more assertive coming from the U.S.?
I think up to a point, there will be intensifications of U.S.-China competition in the region, up to a point. Because deep down, these two relations are very stable, so don't get it wrong. Lower at the relations, for example, U.S. relations with the region is strong. China also was to maintain relations with developing countries. Now, which is the major agenda of Chinese foreign policy, it's not the superpower because it's stable, it's predictable. What happened in South China Sea is less predictable. That's what U.S.-China pay attention. So in that sense, that competition. But at the top level, U.S., China, very stable,
Would you agree with the fact that the relationship is very stable?
I would agree with Kavi. He said that U.S.-China relations will remain largely stable, non-confrontational. I think there's no doubt about it. But the challenge is on some of the specific security issues in East Asia. You're seeing U.S. and China increasingly at odds with each other. We really cannot rule out the possibility of in some sort of military skirmishes or frictions between China and some of China's neighboring countries. And the U.S. has to be involved, even though U.S. has no territorial or maritime zone dispute with China. In the case of East China Sea, South China Sea, in the worst case scenario, if there's any collusion between the government vessels of China and other countries, or a military friction, and that would be really a serious test to China-U.S. relations.
As stable as the relationship is, I mean, does the U.S. need to further refine its policy with China? Even so, because, I think so far what we've witnessed is a U.S. which is reacting more so to China than actually initiating certain policies. Do you think that it's going to have to be able to rein in China and make it sort of play by the rules of the international game?
Well, the U.S. has no capacity to rein in China or make it do anything. And I think I'm not sure I agree with this confidence in the stability of the relationship. It really depends on what China does. We have very much of a sense of what U.S. policy is and is going to be. It's not fundamentally changing. We have much less of a sense of that with China. It's new leadership. It's not clear in all cases who's making decisions on what. I mean, some of the confrontations that we're starting to see happen in the South China Sea, it is not clear how centrally controlled some of those decisions are. There is enormous scope for abrupt conflict breaking out that nobody wants to have happen. But you start pushing the edge to the degree that is already starting to happen, conflicts can break out, and then all bets are off.
The Chinese have some sort of grand plan to actually challenge America anyway? I mean, do they really have such a plan to begin with? We know that they want to continue growing. We know that they want to continue getting stronger in the region. Would you say so, Dia?
The U.S.-China relationship is sort of the great power game of this century, and it's inevitable that China is rising. It will keep trying to form alliances all around it. I don't think it's in China's interest to necessarily provoke or be belligerent outside its borders. There will be a bit of nationalistic chest thumping, a little bit of saber rattling by certain quarters of Chinese society. But at the same time, I think it's in China's definite interest to have peace and stability in the larger Asian theater.
So would you say chest thumping, sort of saber rattling, and basically some sort of assertive sort of posturing, but it's not going to bite? China's not going to bite for real?
Well, we don't see any clear-cut Chinese plan to really exclude the United States from the Asia-Pacific region. But we know that China has been very unhappy about the fact that the U.S. has been the predominant power in handling regional affairs, especially security issues. In the past 10 years also, when China made the proposals for regional economic integration, you see some intention of trying to limit or reduce American influence. But in the security arena, in what has happened in recent years was just opposite. It was completely contrary to the Chinese objective, because of the maritime disputes and conflicts between China and some of its neighboring countries. And you end up actually having strengthened American security role in the region.
All right.
But now there's a new context in China. In the past 10 years or so, China was so keen to maintain regional stability in order for the leaders to focus on domestic economic development. But now that kind of strategic thinking has shifted a little bit. The focus now is increasingly going towards protecting China's security interests and maritime interests, and
Yes.
that would be really a big concern.
All right, let's hold that thought. We've got to go for a short break now. When we return, we're going to talk about how China is really going to deal with the rest of its neighbors here in Asia. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us on Perspectives. Now, let's pick up with what Min Jiang was saying. Basically, he was saying that, China is no longer inward-looking and looking at just growing the economy. It's more outward-looking. It's trying to protect its international stature. And I'm sure Kavi has something to say on that.
Yeah, China essentially is very insecure. I mean, economic power alone is not enough. So that explains why China leaders now is moving southward. For example, China has initiated a policy to create coordinated security patrol along the Mekong River. That is the real backyard of China. It wants to expand. But I think China would need a long strategic thinking. You already have US-centric security alliance. So what will happen if China, as you suggest, that is being outward-looking, would form its own China Center Security Alliance? Of course, it's too far-fetched at this time, but it's possible. Slowly, China is building up with Thailand, with Laos, with Myanmar, slowly expand. So, South China Sea, peace is important, joint development is important. I think China knows what's top on its agenda.
Any responses, Anne?
Yeah, I think two things. I think first it's very important to keep in mind that the U.S. has a very well-developed set of alliances, forward-basing, et cetera, in the region, and a long tradition of doing that kind of partnership with other countries. China does not have that. It's beginning to experiment with it, but essentially right now, its closest partner in the region is North Korea, which does not put it in the best of positions.
Yes.
But I think the other thing that's important is we're talking about China as though China is a single actor. It isn't. It is a very internally complicated set of political trade-offs and decision-making. It is fragmented vertically, it is fragmented horizontally, and it is not altogether clear.
Okay. Well, given all that, what is China's relationships, with its neighbors going to be in 2013? Because they've been promising, they've been banning this peaceful rise for many decades now, and the recent moves it's been making has been pretty provocative, to say the least, right? We've got a new Chinese passport, which actually shows a map showing China's claims in the South China Sea territories, also some claims on the border with India and the Himalayas. It's going to be boarding vessels in the South China Sea in the name of policing illegal activity. It's flying into Senkaku airspace, very provocative measures, which I'm not sure would be conducive in creating the sort of alliance you're talking about,
Well, China is playing bad cop, good cops, I mean, they laid the groundwork for the new generation of leaders, Xi Jinping. That's what I think. I mean, China cannot afford to be bad all the time. Talk tough, during transitional time to test. And I think China has pursued a policy very carefully, especially towards Southeast Asia, which is the most important doorstep. I mean, if ASEAN, for example, being hostile to China, foreign policy outward-looking is not good. So I think China knows what it's doing.
You agree that China cannot afford to be the bad guy all the time, and it's playing good cop, bad cop here? Sudhir?
I mean, China wields tremendous economic power. So we see what happened recently with Japan and China and the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands. Japan felt a very direct and immediate economic impact from what happened. You know, Chinese tourists slowed down, Japanese exports to China slowed down. So I think, you know, in a sense, every other Asian country needs China. You know, China is sort of at the center of this pan-Asian supply chain, and you know, there's a limit to how far they'll take, you know, and any of this aggression. And the other point I wanted to make is that in terms of the alliances that other countries form with China, I think, you know, many of the smaller states around ASEAN and around Asia have been quite happy to see this pivot from the U.S. towards Asia, you know, increased U.S. engagement with Asia. And that's precisely because, you know, they don't want to be in hock to China. So it makes perfect sense for a lot of states actually to have fairly strong alliances with both countries. And,
Sure.
I think that's what they're going to be doing.
Okay, let's switch gears for a moment and look at what's going on, you know, in Japan and South Korea. We know, of course, that there are new leaders there as well. And then if you look at the new slate of leaders coming out of China, if you count Kim Jong-un, you know, who just took over last November, you're talking about 4 new leaders in probably one of the most tense regions in the world today. I guess we're looking at potential for a lot of brinksmanship, are we not? Anne?
We're definitely looking at potential for brinksmanship, which raises 2 questions. What kind of role are these leaders envisioning for themselves, and what are the domestic drivers that they're facing? And how much freedom do they actually have to be more peaceful or to be more aggressive? If you think about China and think about why is it acting the way it is in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, is it being driven primarily by the need to foster domestic legitimacy by playing the nationalism card? They don't have an ideological card anymore. What's the basis of the party's legitimacy? It's nationalism or economic success. The economy is slowing down. How free are they actually to be more peaceful in the South China Sea? Or is it that they're desperate for the energy resources that everyone thinks will be developed in the South China Sea? Again, how much flexibility does that actually give China to step back?
What do y'all think? Is it about nationalism? Is it about resources? Is it about sovereignty?
Yeah,
Pride?
when people say, argue that you know, Chinese decision makers have been playing nationalism, I tend to disagree on this sort of observation, because seeing that would assume that the Chinese elite, the decision makers, are different from the ordinary Chinese. You know, you're assuming that the ordinary Chinese are far more nationalistic, emotional than the leaders themselves. But in fact, I think that may not be true, because you know, think about this: the leaders, they grew up in the same social historical context, right? I don't think the you know, leaders in their mindset, you know, their views about Chinese interests and relations with the outside world are that different from the ordinary people.
What about this relationship with Japan then? I mean, we know Shinzo Abe, you know, when he first won the elections, he talked about not basically compromising, vowing not to compromise on the Senkaku dispute. I mean, are we going to see a more fraught relationship between the two 2013?
Well, it's interesting the way you structure the argument. I think Asian nationalism is a little bit different from the rest of the world, and most of the time is state-dictated nationalism. So in the case of China, I agree with you. But in the case of Japan, it's a little bit different. There's a strong nationalist sentiment that could play in. But in the end, for the benefit of economic prosperity, they will know how to restrain. Certainly in the past few months, one could argue that both sides is really strong and have not yet compromised. But I think pragmatism will prevail in the end in this case.
And in the case of Japan, I mean, you know, Shinzo Abe is seen as you know, on the right, nationalistic. He's talked about rewriting their pacifist constitution, you know, building up the military again. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the economic fundamentals. You know, they've polled the Japanese electorate. You know, most people actually just want the Prime Minister to focus on fixing the economy. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be where his main focus is.
I mean, his itching to sort of redraft this pacifist constitution, do you think that countries like China are going to stand for that? I mean, will that be allowed to happen? And will countries in Asia, which actually suffered at the hands of the Japanese during the World War II, allow it to happen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it has been going on for years, and that's why Japan has expanded its peacekeeping and other international so-called duties, and it will move on. And now Japan can export arms. And now they're looking for recipient countries. So.
Yeah, but is anyone buying that, the fact that it's going to rearm, you know, in the name of actually helping sort of global security efforts?
Well, it will supplement the U.S. strategic interest in the region, and I think Japan has created confidence in Southeast Asia. This is why Japan will strengthen a relation with countries like Vietnam, and the Philippines will increase their defense capacity. So this is the trend, and I think ASEAN countries will accept that.
And speaking of the Philippines, I mean, even a nation like the Philippines, which really suffered under the hands of the Japanese, are now welcoming the rearming of Japan, you know, in the hope that it's going to offer a counterbalance to China. Again, does anyone find this sort of surprising?
Well, maybe in Southeast Asia, the regional states are less concerned about Japan moving towards the right. But in Northeast Asia, if Japan intends to revise its peace constitution, you're going to see enormous amount of opposition from China, South Korea, and North Korea.
But do you think that there's going to be enough support for this rearming of Japan to see really Japan grow in stature, even though economically it's actually quite weak? I mean, are we seeing a Japan which is going to get more powerful over time?
Are we seeing the resurgence of Japan as a geopolitical actor as
That's
opposed to an
right.
economic actor? Probably not in 2013. But what you are seeing is Japan beginning to play a geopolitical role that it didn't used to. Japan is now developing a relationship with India as well as with a number of the ASEAN states. And it isn't surprising, given the kind of saber rattling that China has been doing. Everybody is looking for how do you balance against what appears to be a potentially rising threat. That's just normal standard geopolitics. That's very different from Japan scrapping its constitution and essentially sending a very powerful signal that we are going to be a different kind of country in the future from the country that we've been in the past. That I don't think you're likely to see, at least not as early as 2013.
Okay, we're going to have to take another break now. We've been talking about how Japan is going to probably grow geopolitically. Stay with us here on Perspectives. Thanks for staying with us on Perspectives. I want to move on right now to South Korea. We know it's got its first female leader. Now, how is Park Geun-hye going to deal with a more nationalistic Japan? Let's start with Sudhir.
I think, you know, Park Geun-hye, you know, basically represents continuity in terms of South Korean leadership. You know, she comes from a political family. Some of her opponents might be worried that she's going to adopt a very sort of authoritarian sort of stance towards domestic policies, but you know, in the mold of her father, who was somebody authoritarian, but who also developed South Korea quite well. But I think, you know, once again, she's also going to be constrained by a lot of the economic concerns in her country, and that will actually be guiding a lot more of her administration. You know. Efforts to improve social spending, efforts to rein in the chaebol, efforts to reduce social inequalities. I think these are some of the things that she's going to be focused on, and maybe not so much in terms of sort of the rivalry with Japan. You know, there is, you know, some sort of disagreements over the Dokdo islets, but
Yes.
you know, I think she just like Shinzo Abe in Japan.
Yes.
Are going to be too concerned with domestic economic issues to be able to spend too much time worrying about these issues.
Is it going to be worrying about a rising China? We know it's also facing the choice between China and a traditional ally of the U.S. I mean, how is it going to play out there?
Well, I think South Korea will look inward, and the best panacea for this is to unify the two Korea. You will be surprised that all the governments of South Korea has tried very cleverly to maintain stability, provide humanitarian aid to North Korea, despite all the threats, all the tough talk, but they want to make sure that reunification in the futures will continue. Certainly, unified Korea will be a big dose to increase the pride of the nation. Of course, there are a lot of expense incurred, but it will reduce the defense budget.
Yes, but I guess the key question here is, whether this, fantastic reunification is going to come under her watch. I mean,
no, not, but it will take time, but certainly moving toward that direction.
Well, that depends on whether reunification comes about because North Korea finally collapses, which is pretty much the only way that you can really imagine reunification happening.
But I think the South Korea wants systematically, not a sudden collapse. In the early 90s, I think all the governments, including the United States, fear the sudden collapse of North Korea will affect the stability of the Korean peninsula. That is why the South Korea is working very hard to make sure that whatever the collapse will be less dramatic.
Right. I guess, North Korea looks like it really has no intention of collapsing at this point, given that long-range missile it tested just, Do you think that Ms. Park really is going to be responding or reverting back to the sunshine policy of her predecessors, with regards to North Korea, or do you think she's going to take really something more cautious, a more cautious rapprochement towards the North?
I think very likely she will adopt a more conciliatory policy towards North Korea. A couple of reasons why. Number one, the new president-elect herself is actually sort of pro-sunshine policy. And second, I think a lot of things really depend on how North Korea takes initiative. I think in 2013, North Korea might be less provocative than what it did in 2012. We know in 2012 pretty much the only major event was the satellite launch. Other than that, the young leader in North Korea has been trying to actually to start a limited reform program in North Korea. You look at some of the things he has done, right? Engaging China in setting up the 2 special economic zones, trying to attract more Chinese investments, etc., etc. So,
would you agree that North Korea is going to be less provocative in 2013?
I agree, because North Korea has expanded its diplomatic activities with ASEAN, attending ASEAN meeting, which has never been before.
Yep.
Even though, North Korea signed the Treaty of Amity in 2000 and always skip. Now they come in and want to say something. That's good.
So I suppose the hope is that North Korea, just like Myanmar, obviously it's not going to happen over 1 or 2 years, but over a long period of time will emerge from isolation, maybe prodded on by China as well, I suppose.
Any change in the status quo between, in the relationship between China and North Korea? I mean, we know North Korea sort of defied Chinese calls not to test those missiles twice. Is it going to be continuing to support its neighbor and use it as a buffer against the U.S. and its allies?
Yes, it's kind of stuck with that. It doesn't like what North Korea does. It certainly does not want North Korea as its ally in the region, but it can't afford to destabilize the existing situation. It's, sometimes if you're a major power and you're dealing with other powers, in essence, they have more power over the larger country because the larger country doesn't really have any options. And China really doesn't have any options when it comes to dealing with North Korea. But the scary part is that, as far as we can tell from the outside, China and the United States have not had any kind of deep, thoughtful conversations about what to do if things do start becoming destabilized in North Korea. And that is a very scary situation.
Okay. I want to bring in India now because we haven't really spoken about India. I mean, how is India going to respond to all of this? We know that hackles in India were also rising because of what the Chinese did, how it sort of printed that map in the passport which showed it had claims or revived claims over some of the regions in the Himalayas and on the border. Will India stand for this? Because we know it's supposedly the other Asian superpower. I mean, is it still defining itself as such, and will it stand up to the Chinese?
Well, India will. India is a slow, long-distance runner. It takes time to start out. And this is why it takes 20 years for ASEAN and India to declare their strategic partner. They're so quiet about this. I think it's good, and the reason why ASEAN approach India is that India has been seen as a benign, non-threatening major power, and that is good. We like to have India on our side.
It's been making some threatening sounds lately. You know, it said that basically it's also going to prevent freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, although of course it's not a claimant in that area. Do you think, or some people actually do believe, that this might be the start of a formation of some sort of coalition of the willing against China, if people dissatisfied, you know, Philippines, Vietnam, etc., forming some sort of coalition against the Chinese?
I think the Indian rhetoric of protecting freedom of navigation in the South China is just rhetoric. I mean, seriously, there's no threat, no possibility of freedom of navigation being threatened or blocked in the South China Sea. It's just a sort of superficial impression in the minds of a lot of people that you might have the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea being challenged by any country, but that's just not true. So when the Indian leaders say they are interested in freedom of navigation and security in the South China Sea, they're just saying things to China and just trying to probably exert some pressure on the Chinese.
I'm not sure how you can say that there's no threat to freedom of navigation in the South China Sea when the province of Hainan, which is the province that's responsible for this in China, has announced that it is going to abrogate to itself the right to board vessels any place within the areas that it has goods.
But I think the question
is not any place, it's the territorial waters.
But it's what they're claiming is their territorial waters, which are highly disputed.
Yeah,
well, it's unclear. Basically, China's claim is unclear, it's ambiguous. But if you look at read the contents of the local law passed by the Hainan Provincial Parliament, it says territorial water. It's actually an act that authorizes the police border force to take action against any illegal activities in China's territorial water.
But the problem is that China is claiming as its territorial water areas that are very much claimed by other countries and that extend to essentially all of the South China Sea.
Yeah,
but that's not true.
Can I bring the debate back to India, though, and the fact that, you know, Ming Zhang is saying essentially that it is not prepared to defend its interests beyond the Indian Ocean. I mean, that's all talk. You know, freedom of navigation, South China Sea, that's just posturing. Sudhir.
I tend to agree to some degree that it is rhetoric, but it's influenced greatly by India's, you know, primary international bilateral concern, which is Pakistan, right? And what we've seen over the past couple of years is Pakistan and some of the other countries around India's immediate orbit, example Sri Lanka, forming pretty good economic and political ties with China. And so you're having these interesting relationships forming, but I think in terms of India and China, you know, it's more rhetoric just to assert itself in its immediate neighborhood, and Pakistan will actually remain its main focus for some time.
Given this territorial dispute, which is just obviously very, very fraught, I mean, let's get to ASEAN. How do you think ASEAN is going to figure in this new scheme of things? It was completely thrown at the last summit when Cambodia decided to unilaterally insert in the final declaration the fact that Southeast Asian nations or ASEAN nations will not internationalize the dispute, and of course that sent all of ASEAN into a tizzy. What's going to happen? What are we going to see from this bloc? Kavi?
Well, ASEAN has to stay united, but unfortunately each member now is more confident to pursue their own interests. Certain countries have vested interest with China and willing to do more. So ASEAN is in deep trouble because in the past you have 6 members who understand, who have long-standing relation, who have a very strong sense of connectedness. But somehow with the new member, they're still on the learning curve. So without common position, ASEAN is very weak. And that is why divide and rule is a strategy that will be used against ASEAN. And ASEAN has to be aware of this.
All right, we have to go for another break now. As Kavi was saying, ASEAN is in deep trouble because country states here are putting their bilateral relations with China ahead of the interests of the grouping as a whole. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Perspectives. Now, before the break, we were talking about how ASEAN members and some individual ASEAN members are going out on a limb for themselves. And of course, you know, after that ASEAN summit where there was no communique for the first time in 45 years, we saw the Indonesian foreign minister fly right around the region trying to gain agreement to paper over this crack. Now, the skeptics are saying, of course, that Indonesia now wants to carve for itself a major role in regional diplomacy so that it sends out some sort of signal to the US and China that if it wants to engage Asia, it's got to work through a partner like Indonesia. I mean, does anyone support or agree with this?
Well, I agree. Indonesia is the third largest democracy, and Indonesia is very proud to be called as such. And it wants a bigger role in the global politics. Indonesia is a member of G20. Indonesia has now become the largest denominator for bringing progress to ASEAN. Bali Concord 3, the so-called, or this ASEAN Charter Political Security Cooperation came from democratization of Indonesia. And Indonesia would not stop at that. It would to promote itself, also using ASEAN as a platform. You know, for the next 10 years, it's already planned to have ASEAN in global community, which did not succeed.
But do you think that China will take the counsel of Indonesia? I mean, why should China take Indonesia's counsel? Because it's managed to rein in the hawkishness of the Philippines and Vietnam? Ming-Jian, what do you think?
Well, on regional integration issues, I think China will largely support Indonesian initiatives. Look at the RCEP initiative, for instance. Right? China has said that it will support ASEAN to really integrate the ASEAN plus 6 economies. But on security issues, I doubt that China will actually allow Indonesia to play a dictating role, because China, it seems that China doesn't believe that Indonesia is playing a neutral role. For instance, on the issue of South China Sea, Indonesia has been calling for a united position of ASEAN, and that runs pretty much against China's will.
Do you think that Indonesia will be allowed to get away with this neutral role? I mean, it's typically been thought that the options for countries in the region would be to align themselves with China or with Washington. And here, you know, it's sort of playing the neutrality. Can it get away with it? Sudhir?
Indonesia has always, you know, tried to portray itself from way back in the days of Sukarno as you know, the sort of non-aligned, sort of very neutral kind of state, and you can see recently, I think President Yudhoyono, you know, feels that he played quite a big role in bringing Myanmar as well out of isolation, and that's partly because, you know, I think some people, and that's also why you have this relationship with North Korea as well. You know, some people view Indonesia as a country that was ruled by the generals at one point in time and has since made a fairly successful transition to a nascent democracy that it is today. So I think Indonesia has been, it's got a fairly developed military sort of relationship as well with Russia, where it buys arms from them. So I think Indonesia has for long played this role that it's fairly neutral and non-aligned, and will continue to do so, actually.
It's been trying, of course, for the longest time, and so has Singapore, to advance some sort of group approach to sort of promote this multilateralism with China. That's still very much a work in progress, right? I mean, how much headway do you think ASEAN can make on this?
I think it is very understandable why they are trying to do this. But as Kavi was saying earlier, there's an increasing tendency to be forming bilateral ties and to be pursuing bilateral ties. And you have to go through and look at the countries one by one in terms of their own interest. Indonesia's interests are not the same as Singapore's, are not the same as Malaysia's. And their relationships with China and with the United States are also very, very different. So whether they will be able to hold together and have a common policy, especially when everything is in such turbulence. Which set of trade negotiations are they going to participate in? The US-led ones or the Chinese-led ones? Which security issues are they going to engage with? Well, the Philippines and Vietnam are going to behave very differently from Cambodia and
So
Laos.
do you think we're actually going to see sort of ASEAN sort of crumble? I mean, you know, it's long been priding itself on the centrality, the fact that you know, they all hang together really well. But, you know, in the face of all these shifting sort of paradigms, how is it going to continue as a bloc?
One thing in the history of ASEAN thrive in chaos. So when you're faced with crisis, they tend to get together. So this time they have to find common ground. It's not easy because each country now has vested interest in its relation with United States, with China. But in the end, they have to sit down and form a common strategy. 2 years ago, ASEAN wanted to form a common strategy on global issue. They have failed because there's so few issues that they could agree on. But now realizing that they will work on, and I think this is the top priority in years to come.
The fact that ASEAN is going to pull together in the face of crisis, is that being a little too optimistic, you think?
No, but
Yes.
I think as with many other relationships, I mean, sorry to keep bringing it back to the economy, but the need for better economic integration, I think, will actually drive some agreement on some of the other issues, actually. It'll take a long time. You know, I think they've set a very ambitious timetable of getting things done by 2015. I'm not sure they'll achieve all they want to by that point in time, but the fact that ASEAN as a region, you know, has to sort of bring down a lot of its tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers and things like that, I think will drive cooperation on some of the other issues.
But has ASEAN, you know, coming back to ASEAN and the bottom line, you know, finally woken up, you know, to the fact that it really cannot stay idle when powers like the US and China are using the platform to express their security concerns? It cannot not have any teeth at this point.
So it's interesting you mentioned this. In the past, ASEAN served as a fulcrum for major power to come, conducted the corridors meeting. Now ASEAN should, as one Vietnamese diplomat told me, serve as a watching tower, airport controlling tower, try to dictate which aeroplanes land at what time at particular position. The question is, can ASEAN do that? Wow, it depends on ASEAN centralities and unity. Certainly they have to work hard on it.
Yeah, I think a lot of work to be had. We've got 3 minutes to go. I just want to pick up on Myanmar because, I mean, obviously it's back in the international fold. It's going to be a big story, right, 2013?
Yes. Well, Myanmar could be a game changer in ASEAN because it has done fantastic reform. Of course, there's some skeptics, you know, thinking that it would not continue forever. But so far they have done well on media reforms, on foreign investment law, on other things, but have big problems with the ethnic minority. I think within 2 or 3 years they will see some progress because it's very important for Burma to advance. And Burma has a very clear objective. They know exactly what they want, and they dictated the flow of aids. Unlike earlier years in Cambodia or in East Timor, they abandoned them. So Burmese learned that and wanted to make sure that international assistance will be consistent according to national objectives.
All right, I want to go around the table to wrap up basically what we've said all of this hour. Looking to 2013, I don't know if there's any sort of pit subject, trend, headline, which you are going to foresee, which is going to, you know, hog the headlines for us. Let's start with Sudhir.
It's maybe not something that might hog the headlines, but just something a bit quirky. You know, next year we'll see 2013 we'll see the 100th anniversary of Bollywood, and so I think it's interesting to think about soft power in Asia and which countries are actually developing cultural exports. You know, of course, 2012 saw the emergence of Psy and Gangnam Style, which is a huge hit all over the world. So, you know, to what extent will Asia's soft power develop, you know, in tandem with its economic and political power?
Min Jiang?
Well, I think 2013 is likely to be a year of frequent frictions and conflicts. Regional tensions will continue to exist, with the slim possibility of limited military conflict in the region. But overall, I think economic integration will continue to be the trend, and the security tensions will remain.
All right. Kavi, your say.
I think ASEAN-China relation will be the headlines, and I think both sides have to mend fence because deterioration of their relations destabilize the whole regions and all the bad news. So I will see progress, hopefully, on pushing for code of conduct this year and see broader engagement between ASEAN and China in the less competitive ways.
All right. Last word to Anne.
Okay. I think we're going to see 2013 as the beginning of what we're going to end up calling the turbulent teens. That this is going to be a very, very difficult set of years, driven by not just the rise of China and the geopolitical consequences, but things like the energy, water, food nexus. We do not know how we're going to feed the world's population. We do not know where the water supplies are going to come from. We know we have an energy system that is inherently and deeply dysfunctional. Climate's already having impacts. It's going to be an interesting time.
Indeed. And on that note, I want to thank all my guests, Kavi Chongkitavorn from Chulalongkorn University, Anne Florini from Singapore Management University, Li Mingjiang from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, and Sudhir Vidaketh from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Besides Psy and Gangnam Style, I think we can all agree that it's been a bruising year for diplomacy, to say the least. A slew of strategic shifts that have totally upset the region. It is clear some hard decisions will have to be made in 2013. If you would like to weigh in on the discussion, do leave your comments on our website, or you can tweet us. Meanwhile, keep staying with us on Perspectives as we continue to track developments that will affect the lives of all of us across the region. I'm Lian Pick. For me and the rest of my team, have a great 2013 and see you on the next one.